You wake at 2 in the morning, then again at 4. You shuffle to the bathroom in the dark, half asleep, hoping you do not trip, and you have quietly accepted that this is just what getting older feels like. I am here to tell you it is not. There is a simple habit, one that costs nothing, that can cut those nighttime trips nearly in half. Our grandparents did a version of it without a second thought. Somewhere along the way, it got buried under pills, pads, and appointments. I found the trail in an old clinical paper and a home nursing manual from the 1950s, and I could not let it go. It works in the home you already live in, with the body you already have. Tonight, I want to be honest with you about how this started. I was sitting in a waiting room, watching a man about my age fill out the same clipboard form for the third visit in a row, and I realized nobody in that building had told him the one thing that would have kept him home. That bothered me. So I went digging, and what I dug up changed how I sleep. Let me walk you through exactly what I found, step by step, the same way I found it, because the last piece is the one that made me sit up straight in my chair. It started with a question that sounds almost too simple. Why do we urinate so much more at night as we get older? For years, I assumed it was the bladder shrinking. That is what everyone says. The bladder gets old, it gets small, it cannot hold as much, so you go more often. It sounds reasonable. It is also mostly wrong. Here is the first clue I stumbled onto. When researchers actually measured how much urine older people produce at night, they found the bladder was not the main problem at all. The real culprit was where the body stores fluid during the day. I read this and had to read it twice. The problem was not the container. The problem was the timing of what went into it. Think about your own day for a second. You sit, you watch television in the evening, you rest your feet on the floor or a low stool, and all day long, gravity does what gravity does. Fluid drifts down and pools in your lower legs and ankles. You've seen the sock lines pressed into your skin at the end of the day. That is fluid that should have been handled hours earlier, sitting and waiting in the wrong place. Then you lie down flat to sleep, and the moment you go horizontal, all that pooled fluid comes rushing back into your bloodstream. Your kidneys, which had almost nothing to do while it was stuck in your legs, suddenly get flooded. They do their job. They filter it. They send it to your bladder. And 2 hours later, you are awake, feet on the cold floor, wondering why your body does this to you. It is not your bladder betraying you. It is a scheduling error. Your body is doing at midnight the work it should have finished at 5 in the afternoon. That was the moment the whole thing cracked open for me. Because if the problem is timing, then the solution is timing too. And timing is free. But before I show you how to fix the timing, I had to understand why nobody had ever explained this to me in plain words. And that is where the trail got interesting. I went looking through older medical writing, the kind of thing that does not get quoted much anymore. And I found that this idea of fluid pooling and redistributing was not new at all. Physicians understood it generations ago. There is language about it in nursing texts from the middle of the last century, back when a nurse might visit you at home and actually watch how you lived. They knew that a patient who spent all day in a chair would have swollen ankles by evening and a restless, wet night. They had a name for the swelling. They called it dependent edema because the fluid depends on gravity, settling into whatever part of you hangs lowest. And here is what those old caregivers did about it. They did not reach for a prescription. They raised the feet. Simple as that. In the afternoon, before the evening even began, they would have the person lie back and put their legs up, sometimes on pillows, sometimes on the arm of a couch, and rest that way for a stretch of time. The fluid would drain back and be dealt with while the sun was still up. By bedtime, there was far less left to flood the kidneys. They understood something we forgot. The best time to prevent a 2 in the morning bathroom trip is not at bedtime. It is in the middle of the afternoon. Now I know what you might be thinking because I thought it too. That sounds too easy. If it were that simple, my doctor would have told me. Hold that thought, because that exact question is what pulled me deeper, and what I found was not comfortable. Let me give you the practical version first, so you have something you can use tonight, even if you stop watching right here. In the late afternoon, somewhere between 3 and 5 o'clock, lie down and elevate your legs above the level of your heart for about 30 minutes. You do not need special equipment. A couple of ordinary bed pillows under your calves and ankles will do it. Get your feet higher than your chest. Rest there. Read. Listen to the radio. Close your eyes. What you are doing is giving gravity 30 minutes to work in your favor instead of against you. The fluid that would have ambushed you at midnight drains back now, gets filtered now, and you empty it before bed instead of during your sleep. There was research that put numbers to this, and the numbers are what convinced me it was not folklore. In studies of older adults with nighttime urination, this afternoon leg elevation, combined with a couple of other small adjustments I will get to, reduced the number of nighttime bathroom trips by roughly a third, and in some people more than that. For someone getting up 3 times a night, cutting that to 1 is the difference between waking exhausted and waking rested. That is not a small thing. Sleep is where your body repairs itself, and broken sleep quietly wrecks everything else, from your mood to your balance to your heart. So that was the first real discovery. The nighttime problem is largely an afternoon problem in disguise. But once I understood that, a bigger question started nagging at me. If this fluid timing was so well understood generations ago, and it cost nothing, why had it vanished so completely from ordinary advice? Why had I never heard it, not once, in all my years of appointments? That is where I stopped being just curious and started being a little bit angry. Here is what I began to notice as I compared the old material with the modern material. The old nursing text talked about behavior, change what you do, when you do it, and how you position your body. The modern material, the pamphlets, and the quick advice talked about products and prescriptions. Somewhere between then and now, a free behavior got quietly replaced by things you buy. I am not saying anyone sat in a room and plotted to hide leg elevation from you. It is subtler and honestly worse than that. It is that nobody makes money when you put your feet up on a pillow. There is no product to sell, no monthly refill, no follow-up visit. A habit that you do alone, for free, in your own living room, does not appear in any catalog. So it simply falls out of the conversation, not banned, just forgotten, because forgetting it is profitable and remembering it is not. Think about what the nighttime problem has become instead. There are pads and protective garments, and the market for those is enormous, measured in billions of dollars a year. There are medications, taken nightly, refilled monthly, each with its own list of side effects that sometimes need their own treatments. There are specialist visits and tests. None of that is evil on its own. Sometimes it is exactly what a person needs. But notice how the free first step, the one our grandparents used, got skipped entirely on the way to the paid steps. And that made me wonder what else got skipped. Because if one free habit could get buried this thoroughly, it probably was not the only one. So I kept pulling the thread, and the next thing I found was about how we empty the bladder, or rather how we fail to. Here's the clue that started this part. A lot of older people feel like they need to go again just minutes after they have already gone. You finish, you wash your hands, you walk back to your chair, and within 10 minutes there is that pressure again. Most people assume this means their bladder is weak or overactive. Sometimes that is true, but very often the real issue is that the bladder never fully emptied in the first place. As we age, the bladder muscle does not always squeeze all the way down. A little urine gets left behind, sitting there, and a partly full bladder fills back up to the point of urgency much faster than an empty one. So you are not making urine unusually fast. You just never got down to zero, so you hit the alarm level again quickly. The old fix for this has a name that sounds almost too plain. It is called double voiding, and it is exactly what it sounds like. You urinate, and when you feel finished, you stay where you are, wait about 30 seconds, lean forward a little, and try again. That second attempt catches the urine the first attempt left behind. Nurses taught this by hand at the bedside for decades. It is written into rehabilitation guides, and it costs nothing. Let me be specific, because the details matter. Do not jump up the instant the first flow stops. Sit or stand and relax for a slow count of about 30. Then lean your upper body slightly forward, which gently presses on the bladder, and let it finish. For men, sitting down to do this can actually help the muscles relax more completely than standing. That last part surprised me, but the reasoning is sound. When you are relaxed and leaning forward, the bladder gets a fuller chance to squeeze itself out, and you leave far less behind to set off the next false alarm. I tried it myself because I do not like repeating things I have not tested. And within a week, that annoying 10-minute return trip mostly stopped. It felt like I had been driving with the parking brake half on and finally released it. So now I had two free habits, both real, both old, both nearly forgotten. Elevate the legs in the afternoon, empty the bladder completely with a second try, and both of them were about the same underlying idea, which was starting to feel like the secret spine of this whole investigation. The problem is rarely that your body is broken. The problem is usually that a small mechanical detail has drifted out of alignment and nobody showed you the tiny correction. But that raised the question that would not let me sleep, which is fitting given the subject. If these corrections are this small and this effective, how many nights of sleep, how many years of good rest had people lost simply because the knowledge was allowed to fade? And what was the deepest version of this that I had not found yet? That instinct to seek out the real reason, to trace things back to their source, is exactly what this whole investigation has been about. If it speaks to you the way it spoke to me, I want you to know that I have gone much deeper into all of this in my books, Start Strong, Senior Mastery, and Senior System. Each one is a structured walk through the forgotten habits and practical rhythms that used to be common knowledge for older adults, laid out the same way I have laid this out for you, step by step, with the reasoning behind every piece. You can find them through the link in the description. If you have been nodding along this whole time, you will find a great deal more waiting for you there. Now let's keep pulling that thread, because the next discovery is where the trail got truly surprising. That question is what led me to the part I want to make sure reaches you, especially if you have been sitting there thinking this is all fine for people with a spare room and time to nap and money to spare, because I know some of you are thinking exactly that. You live in an apartment, you live alone, you do not have a fancy recliner or someone to help you. Maybe you are watching this thinking these tricks are for other people, more comfortable people. I built this next part for you specifically. Every single thing I am about to describe can be done alone, tonight, in the smallest home, with nothing you do not already own. You do not need a special chair. Your bed and 2 pillows are enough for the leg elevation. If you have no spare pillows, roll up a spare blanket or even a couple of bath towels and use that under your calves. If you cannot get down onto a bed easily, sit in your regular chair and put your feet up on another chair, or on a sturdy box, or on a stack of old books, high enough that your ankles are above your hips. It does not have to be perfect. It has to be higher than where the fluid has been pooling. For the fluid timing, there is a second free adjustment that pairs with the leg elevation, and it is just about clock management. Look at how much you drink in the last 3 hours before bed. You do not need to be thirsty and miserable, and you absolutely should not stop drinking water during the day, because dehydration makes bladder irritation worse, not better. What you do is shift your drinking earlier. Front load your fluids in the morning and afternoon and taper them in the evening. Have your water and your tea earlier and let the last couple of hours before bed be light. That way, combined with the legs up session, most of the day's fluid is processed and passed before your head hits the pillow. And here is one more free thing that costs nothing but attention. Certain drinks in the evening act like a switch that turns your kidneys and bladder up to high. Caffeine is the obvious one in coffee and in many teas and colas. But the one that catches people off guard is alcohol, even a single evening glass, because it tells your body to release more water right when you want it to hold steady. So does very salty food at dinner, because the salt pulls water and your body dumps it later. You do not have to give up anything you love forever. Just move the coffee to the morning, keep the evening glass small and early, and go easier on the salty snacks after supper. None of that requires a purchase. It requires only knowing which levers exist. Now, if you have some swelling in your ankles during the day and no way to elevate for long stretches, there is a gentle movement version. Every hour or so while you are sitting, pump your feet up and down at the ankle like you are pressing a gas pedal 20 or 30 times. Then circle them. This works the calf muscles, and the calf muscles are what push pooled fluid back up out of your legs. People who have to sit for long periods have used this trick for ages. It is not as powerful as lying down with your feet up, but if that is not possible for you, this keeps the fluid moving instead of settling. I want you to notice something about everything in this section. Not one item on that list came from a store. Not one required another person. Not one required you to be wealthy or spry or living in a big house. This is the part that made me trust the whole trail, because the real old knowledge always has this quality. It assumes you have almost nothing, and it works anyway. That is how you can tell it came from a time when people could not simply buy their way out of a problem. They had to solve it with what was in the room. But even after all of this, I still had not found the piece that would become the center of everything. I had habits. I had timing. I had good, solid, forgotten techniques. What I did not have yet was the single method that tied the whole thing together, the one that the oldest source I found treated as the real key. And when I finally traced it, I understood why it had been the first thing to disappear. Here is how I got to it. I kept coming back to one detail in that mid-century home nursing material. Over and over, alongside the leg elevation, they described a specific daily rhythm. Not just putting the feet up once, but a deliberate afternoon rest period at the same time every day, treated as seriously as a meal. And they insisted on the timing being consistent. Same window, every single day. I almost skipped past it because it sounded like an old-fashioned quirk, the kind of thing people used to do because they had slower lives. But then I found the reasoning, and it stopped me cold. Your body runs on internal clocks, and one of the most powerful of those clocks controls when your kidneys make urine. In a healthy young body, that clock is set so the kidneys slow down at night. That is why a young person can sleep 8 hours without waking. As we age, that clock drifts. The nighttime slowdown weakens, and the kidneys keep working through the night as if it were daytime. This is a real, documented shift in the body's daily rhythm, and it is a huge part of why nighttime urination increases with age. It is not just the fluid in your legs. It is that your internal schedule for making urine has gone flat, losing the difference between day and night. And here is the buried key. That internal clock is not fixed in stone. It responds to signals. It responds to light, to meals, to activity, and, crucially, to rest taken at a consistent time. When you give your body a firm, repeated daily rhythm, the clock sharpens. The day-night difference in urine production can be partly restored. In other words, the old insistence on a fixed afternoon rest at the same hour every day was not a quaint habit. It was a way of retraining the body's clock so it remembered the difference between noon and midnight. So, the deepest version of this, the finale of the whole trail, is not a single trick. It is a small daily ritual that combines everything into one repeatable act, and it comes almost word for word from that older caregiving practice. Here it is, completely. Every afternoon at the same time, ideally between about 3 and 5 o'clock, you do a single 15 to 30-minute session. You lie back somewhere and raise your legs above your heart on pillows. Before you settle in, you empty your bladder using the double voiding method. First pass, wait, lean, finish. Then you rest quietly in that legs up position, no screen in your face, letting your body wind down. You do this at the same hour every day so your internal clock can lock onto the rhythm. That single session does three things at once. It drains the pooled fluid from your legs while the sun is still up, so it gets processed before bed. It fully empties your bladder in the middle of the day so nothing sits and stagnates. And most importantly, done at the same time daily, it feeds your body's clock the steady signal it needs to remember that night is for resting and day is for working. 3 problems, 1 free habit, 15 minutes. The people who wrote this down decades ago did not have the modern science of body clocks to explain why it worked. They only knew that it worked because they watched it work in real homes, on real people, night after night. They preserved the how even when they could not fully explain the why. Then the how got buried, because a 15-minute rest with your feet up cannot be bottled and sold. And it sat there waiting in old pages almost nobody opened anymore. I opened them. I tested it. And now it belongs to you. I want to be clear and fair, because you have been lied to enough by people promising miracles. This will not cure every cause of nighttime urination. There are real medical conditions, from infections to prostate trouble to diabetes to heart issues, that make you get up at night, and those need a real doctor. If you get up suddenly far more than usual, if there is pain, if there is blood, if your ankles swell severely, please have someone check you properly. This habit is not a replacement for care when care is needed. What it is the free first step that used to come before everything else. The step that was quietly skipped so you would move straight to the things that cost money. For an enormous number of ordinary people, that free first step is enough to change their nights. Think about what that means over a year. If you have been getting up 3 times a night, and this brings you down to 1, you are reclaiming hundreds of interrupted moments of sleep. You are lowering your risk of a nighttime fall in the dark, which for people our age is one of the most dangerous things that can happen. You are giving your heart and your mind the deep rest they have been starved of. And you are doing it without a single prescription, a single pad, or a single extra appointment. All from a habit that was written down before most of us were born and then allowed to fade because it was too cheap to be worth remembering. That is the part that stays with me. Not that the trick works, that it was ours all along. It was handed down, then set aside, then nearly lost, and the only reason it slipped away is that nobody profits from your feet being up on a pillow at 4 in the afternoon. So here is what this whole investigation really gave back to me, and I hope it gives you the same. It gave me back the belief that my body is not simply falling apart on a schedule I cannot touch. So much of what we are told to accept as just aging is really just a small rhythm knocked out of place, waiting for someone to show us the correction that used to be common knowledge. You are the kind of person who wants the reason, not just the order. You want to see the evidence and decide for yourself, and you would rather try the free thing that our grandparents trusted than be sold the expensive thing before anyone has explained why. That instinct is not stubbornness. That is wisdom. And it is exactly the instinct that dug this back up. Now I want to hear from you. Of everything I laid out, the afternoon legs up rest, the double voiding, the earlier fluids, or that steady, same-time daily rhythm that retrains the body clock, which one are you going to try first tonight? Tell me in the comments, and tell me how many times you have been getting up at night, because I read these and I want to know where you are starting from. And while you are there, tell me what part of the world you are watching from. It always amazes me how far this reaches. If you would rather uncover these buried ordinary secrets with the rest of us than keep paying for what used to be free, come along with me. There is a whole shelf of this forgotten knowledge, and I am working my way through it one piece at a time. The next thing I am chasing is an old bedtime habit tied to the temperature of your feet, of all things, that those same caregivers swore helped people fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. I found the first thread of it, and it is stranger than this one. Stay with me, and we will pull it out into the light together. Here's the part I couldn't fit into the video. Inside the Wise Living Circle, I pick up right where I just left off with the leg elevation routine, so you sleep through tonight. And if something isn't clear, you can ask me directly. A real person, me and my team, answers you, never a machine. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, one click.